Welcome to Retirement Unlocked with Larry Heller. Your life, your way, unlimited possibilities. Join us as we explore how tailored financial planning and investments can help you navigate life transitions with confidence. Let's dive into this week's episode.
And welcome back to Retirement Unlocked with Larry Heller. And before we go any further, I need to tell you that Heller Wealth Management is now a part of Savant Wealth Management. So going forward, you may hear the Heller Wealth Management team referred to as Savant or Savant Wealth Management, but that does nothing to keep them from keeping their commitment to you and helping you unlock your best retirement. Remains exactly the same, just a new name thrown in the mix for you. Now, today we're going to tackle the topic of that many people spend years preparing for this thing called retirement, but far fewer focus on the critical window that surrounds it. The 5 years before and after you retire are often called the retirement danger zone, a period where key financial and lifestyle decisions can have a lasting impact on your future. During this time, your income changes, benefits disappear, and new planning challenges do, in fact, emerge. Today, Larry explains why this window matters, where the biggest risks often show up, and how to navigate this transition with a greater clarity and a lot more confidence. Hey, Larry, it's good to see you again. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Good to see you, Bill.
So give us a quick overview. What are we looking at here in terms of this window?
Yeah, so I mean, what we're going to kind of really focus on is really a lot of people looking to retire, and they may be in a high income state and going to a low income state or a no income state. And we're up here in New York, and you hear a lot of people going down to Florida. So New York's a higher income state. And
you got the governor trying to talk people to come back from Florida.
Yes, he is trying to call people, come back and pay your fair share. That's what he wants. That's what she wants. Yes,
That's exactly right.
So that's the case. But there are other states such as Texas and up until recently, the state of Washington and some others. But we're going to talk about that. You have to think about more than just income taxes.
Right.
There's property taxes, sales taxes, state taxes matter. And then you also should think about, the cost of living and the cost of healthcare. Not only just the cost of healthcare, but actually your doctors on that. So some of the insurance can offset that. And if you want to fly back and forth to see a specialist or a doctor in a state that you're not going to be in, that's something to consider if you're not the healthiest, or even later as you get older. And then there's lifestyle and social impacts that can really affect your personal happiness beyond your finances. So, the guidance is crucial for estate planning, for income tax planning, for long-term financial strategies when relocating to other states. But you want to kind of, think about some of these strategies. And we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of real life scenarios to illustrate and surprises that retirees can face when relocating.
Yeah, let's start with income tax, because this is funny. And I told you right before we started this recording, this episode, I said, I'm not going to tell you who said this, but I was talking to somebody who'd grown up in the Northeast. They'd done some traveling, had been around, but hadn't lived anywhere else. They were shocked, Larry, to find out that there are states that don't have any income tax, and which made me laugh out loud. And I thought, well, if you haven't lived there and you don't know, maybe you just don't know.
Yeah. And maybe you're just moving just to save the income taxes. So, it's beyond the income tax. So yes, there is definitely an appeal to moving to a state with low or no income tax.
Right.
And possibly a state with low and no estate taxes or inheritance taxes. But like I mentioned, there are some possibly higher property taxes, higher sales taxes, insurance. I know insurance in Florida with all the hurricanes they have could be even hard to get, let alone more expensive. So those are kind of some of the things you kind of want to factor in beyond the taxes.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people look at it and they're looking at another state. Like I'll give you an example. I know people looked at Pennsylvania and go, well, they have a flat tax there. They got a 3% tax. But then they start looking at all the other taxes and they realize all of these states have to raise money. They got to fund it. So the money's got to come from you somewhere, one way
Yep.
or the other. If it's not through income tax, it could be through some other taxation.
Absolutely.
And as we go through today's episode, I do want to remind people that don't worry about taking notes, okay? You don't need to do that because Larry's team has put together a summary, a takeaway on the retirement danger zone that you can access in the download link in the episode description below. So have you got any real life examples, anybody you know or a client you worked with that, was shocked when they did the calculations?
No, not really shocked. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, which kind of puts everything that we're going to talk about in perspective. We do have a couple examples, but some of the things, the surprises that we talk about is that, you want to look at the difference in housing costs post-pandemic. Some of these states such as Florida, the housing costs have gotten very expensive. The HOA fees in some of the communities down there have gotten very expensive. So before you're moving from one state where you know what your costs are going to be for housing, that could be a little bit of a shock. And like I mentioned, the healthcare expenses and could be different, and the specialized care could be different, plus just the daily living from one state to the other that you want to take into consideration. So you do want to do some research to really kind of see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense for you on that.
Yeah. And I think people really, really, really need to take a look at healthcare, because I don't think people think about healthcare till they have to have healthcare. And they realize that, whoa, you know what? My doctor's actually pretty good. I really am happy with the people that I see, and they're not everywhere. It's like difficult to go see a doctor in a state that you no longer live in.
Yeah, I mean, being in New York, we're really lucky. We've got some really quality specialists in New York City here. And then, so if you're not going to be, or being in a state or an area which doesn't have access to the healthcare or some of the, proximity to hospitals and specialists. So you do want to kind of, research that and see kind of, is that going to be a factor? And one thing is, it may not be a factor today, but who knows what tomorrow is going to be. We've had clients that have unfortunately have gone down there, and not only is the healthcare become an issue with doctors, but also family helping them get to and from doctors as they age. And we've had clients that have moved back to the Northeast, moved back to New York and New Jersey just to be closer to family members at that particular time. So maybe you are planning on going to Florida for estate tax purposes, and you come back to New York. So just that's something to consider, is the healthcare impact and how important that is.
Yeah, and it sounds silly, but like accessibility, I think in the Northeast, we're all pretty used to, well, there's not a hospital not that far away, but there are states you can move to where the hospital may be quite a ways away from you. And if you don't have family that can help you get back and forth, it can become a really big problem, which kind of gets into and hints at one of these other issues that I know you want to talk about, which is that's going to affect your lifestyle.
Yeah, it's really kind of the lifestyle and the social impacts that some people don't realize. Leaving a community where they have a lot of family and a lot of friends and a home feeling, and going to someplace new. How are they going to make, where are they going to make friends there, down there? Have they, looked at different clubs and support areas? Because again, that's a big factor in longevity, is really friends and lifestyle, and especially, if you're a married couple, and what happens if one passes away? Are you going to get comfortable in that lifestyle? So, how your lifestyle shift can impact your overall satisfaction well above your finances. So, one of the tips that we really kind of say to people when they're looking to relocate is to rent first. Wherever you're going, if you can in any possible way, rent before you get down there. See how it feels. Because until you're there, even if you know somebody there, it's, oh, this is great, you'll love it. We've had people move, and then they said, oops, this isn't the right thing for us, and now we got to move again. So we highly recommend that you rent first in a new area before buying.
That is a great idea. I actually knew a couple, he was getting ready to retire, sell his business. and they had identified a couple of states that they thought they really would like to move to. And then they went and spent time in one of those states, visited a lot there, had extended stays, and were it made their mind up for them. They were like, no, that state is now off the table. So yeah, underscore that. If you can go and spend some time somewhere, you really should, because
and today with Airbnbs, you can even do a long extended stay. You don't have to commit to a year lease and get furniture and do that. You can do a few different Airbnbs at different times of the year for an extended stay to see if that's a place that you're going to like.
What about long-term pitfalls, possible pitfalls, Larry?
Yeah, so going from one state to the other, you've created. I'm going to talk estate planning. So you've created your documents, wills, beneficiaries, possible trusts, and then you move to another state. Well, the wills still are good, but do they function the way that you wanted to? So you may be moving to a community property state, which has a whole different set of rules than where the state you're coming from. Or you may be moving from a state that has a low cost in probate, going to a high cost in probate, which may want to kind of make you have more of a need for a revocable trust. So if you are moving to a new state, you really want to have somebody that specializes in that state review all your documents to make sure that they're in proper order. And some states like Florida have like what's called homesteads. You want to make sure you can take advantage of some of those type things and not be tripped up by paying higher costs. So that's a real important pitfall that we see people don't really kind of look at until sometimes it's too late.
I'm sorry, Larry. Do you recommend to your clients that they have an attorney review it in the state they're thinking about going to, having an attorney review it, or how do you?
I mean, you can if you're pretty sure that you're going to be moving down there. But the thing about it is, your current estate attorney may not be able to review in another state because that they don't practice in that state. So you got to find somebody in there. The good thing now, one of the things at Savant that we have is we have estate tax planners in-house, so that can review no matter what state you're looking at. But so that's something just to be considered. And once you become a permanent resident in that particular state, you want to have somebody review it to see if you need to make any changes. Plus, some states have different documents that are needed for a final death and healthcare proxies that may be different in a different state that you're going to. So it's real important that if you are relocating, that you do speak to an attorney that's licensed in that state that can make sure that your documents, if they are fine or if they need to be updated, they do get updated.
Yeah. You don't want to find out too late that they needed to be updated. That is not the way you want to go with that. So do you have any real life scenarios you mentioned up at the top of the podcast that, you had a couple of examples you could give us about people moving and the things that they discovered? Yeah, I'm going to give you
real life scenario. But one of the pitfalls that, you should be kind of, if you're moving to a different state that maybe is not a low income tax state, but you want to kind of look at some of your state specific nuances when it comes to pensions, or withdrawals. One in New York State, they exclude the first $20,000 of income from a retirement plan. And so if you're married, they exclude $40,000. So another state may not do that. So even if you're moving to not a zero cost income tax state, but just to another state, really want to know what kind of the nuances are. So again, discussing that planning, professional guidance is crucial when you're relocating for retirement.
Fair point. Because there are some states that don't tax Social Security benefits. There's states that do tax it, as a matter of fact. So yes, absolutely. Avoid those pitfalls.
So let's kind of get to a couple of real life scenarios. Both of them happen to be relocating. This one was relocating from New York to Florida.
Okay.
So a couple in their early 60s selling their New York home and moving to a coastal city in Florida. And they were under the impression that they were going to save, tens of thousands of dollars in state income taxes. But again, when they looked at their property taxes and homeowners insurance in Florida were much higher, the savings weren't as great because their income taxes weren't as high when they both were retiring. So they weren't saving a ton of money on their income taxes. In addition, the healthcare costs increase because unfortunately they needed to travel further to see specialists than they had in New York. So, and one of them wanted to come back to their specialist in New York. So they had to fly back in every time. So the additional costs of that was something to keep in mind. And then some of the estate planning complications that arose in Florida and inheritance laws and some of the new property tax rules that are going on made it a lot more complicated for them. So again, lesson, tax savings need to be compared to include healthcare, to include estate considerations, to include living away from your family, and all those type things. The tax savings, there would have been some tax savings. This client didn't have a major estate tax that they were going to be saving, but the income taxes that they were saving turned out to be not as great. And when they added in the healthcare and the family being far away, even though the weather was nicer, and they thought that they would enjoy that a lot more, the weather was nicer, but it turns out they didn't like the summer times down there. So
they didn't like
so
150 degree summers.
Yeah. Right. So they preferred actually having the winters than having the very hot and humid summer times down there. No, maybe if they would have rented and stayed, a few weeks during the August, they would have known that before they happened to have purchased a home down there and ended up moving back.
Oh man, yeah, that made me laugh because it made me think of my dad. My dad used to complain. He used to say, "You know what? It's hot. I can take all my clothes off. I'm still going to be hot. But when it's cold, I can put clothes on and get warm." So,
there you go. So
exactly.
So everyone is a little bit different.
So
another scenario that we had a client that was moving to a second home in Florida. They still owned a home in New York, and they were trying to figure out first which home that they wanted to make their primary residence, because they had a home in New York that had appreciated. So they didn't want to sell now, but they knew they would be able to have a $500,000 exclusion on capital gains if eventually they kept New York as their primary home. But if they made Florida their primary home, they would save a lot of money on income taxes. They would save money on property taxes by making it their homestead. So in this scenario, they decided to make Florida the primary home. Well, they moved to Florida. They moved to a high rise on the East Coast. And then they were like, you know what? We don't like being in a high rise. We can't meet anybody. We want to be in a golf community. So a couple years later, they moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. Now, they did benefit because they did have some capital appreciation on their apartment. So they were able to benefit by not paying any tax on the capital gains from that house because they did make Florida their primary residence. But then they moved to the west side of Florida. And they were there and they liked the golf community. But after being there for a little while, they realized life's kind of short and they didn't want to be so far away from their family. So now they're selling their house on the West Coast at a loss, not a huge loss, at a loss. And now they're buying a home in South Carolina so they can be closer to their family.
Yeah.
And then they have the same question again. Do they make South Carolina their primary residence? Do they make Florida, go back to making New York their primary residence? And we'll talk about residency in a few minutes. In this case, they ended up making South Carolina their residency. So lesson here, relocation decisions must weigh lifestyle, social factors alongside your financial savings.
Yeah, man, oh man, absolutely. There is a lot to consider, and it's not just look. They don't have income tax down there because every state in the country has got to raise money to fund the government. So be sure you look at how they do it. As a matter of fact,
So some of the kind of the key takeaways we talk about. And I want to talk a little bit about a scenario of kind of, moving from Florida and talk about residency a little bit. So I'm going to kind of jump ahead and kind of talk about that first. But we've talked about the the expenses of moving and the lifestyle and the tax highlights, but there's also residency along those lines.
Yes.
So, just moving to another state and spending more than 183 days, 6 months doesn't mean that you're a resident in there. So if you are moving from one state to another, make sure you follow the rules. And I'm just going to touch on this a little bit, but it doesn't mean this is entirely what will make you resident in that state. But, usually spending more than 183 days, 6 months in there, and we're talking a little bit now more about Florida. You must intend to make Florida your primary home. So this includes changing your addresses on all financial and legal documents. You file a sworn statement with the county clerk where you live. And just, kind of legal ties, making your Florida, your license, your driver's license in Florida within 30 days of establishing residence, registering your vehicles, registering to vote. So it needs to be kind of your, show more than just staying 183 days in a particular state. And one of the reasons why I mentioned this, and we're talking about kind of relocating to Florida, is because New York is extremely aggressive for people that decide, I'm not going to pay New York state taxes. I'm going to make Florida my resident. And Florida, what happens, New York loses a lot of tax money, and they're not too happy about that. So they go very aggressively after people. So you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row. Speak to an expert that can help you maybe with the residency before you move to Florida from New York.
Yeah. Absolutely. I've heard nightmare stories actually from people who did not do that and were shocked because, New York State didn't just overlook.
Yep.
So give us some key takeaways on this episode, Larry.
Yeah. So, some of the key takeaways, the summary of hidden costs that a lot of retirees often overlook. And really want to emphasize relocation is more than a tax decision. It affects finances, healthcare, lifestyle, and planning. And finally, I encourage all listeners to evaluate the full picture and consult with professionals before making such a big change to relocate to another state.
Yeah. Sit down and talk with your financial advisor. It's a big move. Take the time, right?
Yeah,
consider
absolutely.
it. Well, thanks, Larry. This was a great episode and gave us a couple of things to think about. Listeners, thank you for listening to Retirement Unlocked. If today's episode helped you better understand the retirement danger zone and how to navigate this critical transition, please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with someone who could benefit. And if you're within 5 years of retirement or just recently retired and want to make sure that your income, benefits, and overall plan are aligned for this important window, check the episode description for resources and a link to schedule a complimentary 20-minute call. Because retirement success is not just about how much money you have. It is about how you manage those moments that matter the most. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, Larry.